The Chicago Bears were not expected to play the Philadelphia Eagles that closely. It's not a moral victory, but it's a sign that maybe the Chicago Bears are a little bit closer to success than we might have thought.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. On the show today, we go back through the Chicago Bears' loss to the Philadelphia Eagles and look at how the Chicago Bears overachieved in this game, kept it closer than we thought it would be, and even led for portions of this game and felt like they were going blow for blow with the best team in the NFC, period, for the majority of this football game. We'll also look at what derailed them from this game, from being able to pull off the upset and do what no one thought the Bears would be able to do in this game. And we'll take a closer look at what we talked about in the preview of this game. The Bears just needing their talent to shine through, needing to win some of those one-on-ones, and where the Bears felt like they were winning those and where they weren't. But let's start with how the Bears overachieved in this game. Because, we knew that Justin Fields was going to have to shoulder a lot of the load in this game, with Darnell Mooney out long-term and Chase Claypool out for this game. You're really not looking at a supporting cast worth much, right? I mean, Cole Kmet, David Montgomery, of course, but your top receivers were Byron Pringle and Dante Pettis, and they called up Simba Webster for this game because N'Keal Harry wasn't able to go. And of course, Equanimeous St. Brown gets hurt during the game as well. I mean, you're really looking at a Bear, not B-A-R-E, Bear wide receiving core there that, Fields is just going to have to kind of shoulder the load there, and he did, right? And even the offensive line struggling against a really good Eagles pass rush. It was on Fields sometimes to escape the pocket more and make some pretty spectacular individual efforts on some runs and some passes that, got receivers open as a result of his legs. And it was the type of heroics we're almost coming to expect from Justin Fields now. It didn't result in, huge volume of passing yards, but he was very efficient, especially early in the game. I mean, he only had a couple of incompletions on his first 12 or 15 passing attempts. He was really rolling pretty smoothly, and things trailed off, especially after he left with the cramps and came back, but also rushing for 95 yards and having that big 39-yarder that was basically a touchdown, but stepped out of bounds at about the 10-yard line. Like, that was what the Bears needed to stay in a game like this and to go blow for blow with a team like the Philadelphia Eagles. We talked last week on Crossover Thursday with Locked On Eagles and also our Game Plan podcast on Friday about how if the Bears were going to upset the Eagles in this game, they were also going to need the Eagles to make some of their own mistakes and give the Bears some extra opportunities. And we saw that, right? Jalen Hurts, both of his interceptions to me didn't necessarily feel like, Kyler Gordon and DeAndre Houston Carson each individually made some, diving heroic interception. They were in the right place at the right time, and they caught the ball when it came to them. That requires skill, and not every defensive player is able to do those things. It's not to take it away from them, but it felt a little bit more like unexpectedly bad Jalen Hurts moments in that game that set the Bears up with some easier drives and certainly neutralized some drives from the Philadelphia Eagles. And you also have Miles Sanders' fumble, much more directly forced fumble by Mike Pennell, the defensive lineman, but picked up by Kyler Gordon, if I remember correctly. Like, those were the kind of plays that this Bears team was going to need in a game like this to keep it close or to potentially pull off the upset. And the Eagles, it seemed like in the second half especially, got out of their own way a little bit more and looked a little bit more like the Philadelphia Eagles we were expecting, but they never got into blowout mode. I don't think they ever held a double-digit. I think they did hold a double-digit lead, but it never got to be more than the 2 possessions there when Fields brought it back to within 5 there in the fourth quarter. Like, it was never out of hand for the Bears, right? There was always that moment of if they can just make a stop here, they'll have another chance, and they get a touchdown when they needed to, and kind of keep that momentum alive. I also thought the defense did a surprisingly good job in a lot of areas, but particularly containing Jalen Hurts and the Eagles' rushing game as a whole. That, yes, there was the 22-yard untouched touchdown run. Terrible play. Jaquan Brisker blitzed the wrong gap there, and there was no one else back there. I mean, they were cover 0 at that point. It was an all-out blitz with man coverage, so if Jalen Hurts gets 3, he's going to be free. To me, that was more of like a one player and a scheme issue than, them just not being good enough to stop Jalen Hurts. But outside of that 22-yard run, Jalen Hurts would have had 39 yards rushing on 16 attempts. That's a little over 2 yards a carry. And Miles Sanders had 42 yards on 11 attempts. Like, they largely shut down the Eagles' ground game and largely kept Jalen Hurts' legs from really hurting them. I mean, again, just outside of that one, I don't want to call it fluky, but it's kind of, it wasn't representative of the rest of the game in how the Bears stopped Jalen Hurts. There were a lot of those plays where Hurts would take the ball and he got hit hard. I think Sanborn got him once. Joe Thomas got him hard. Phrasing there. Joe Thomas hit him hard. Travis Gibson landed on him at the end of a play and definitely put his shoulder into the ground. So they punished Jalen Hurts in this game, and I think that was a large part of how they were able to keep them to a reasonable 25-point score on the scoreboard that didn't allow the Eagles to run away with this one and put up as many points as we expected the Eagles to put up in this game against a Bears defense that has been struggling tremendously. And it seemed like certainly getting Gordon and Brisker back helped a lot, but also just the bye week, guys settling in a little bit more, guys trying to get a little bit more healthy on that side of the ball. I think it all led to a defense playing a little bit better. I mean, Hurts still threw for 300-plus yards, but no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. And, of course, he had the rushing touchdowns, but, quarterback sneaks. This is not him scrambling. He did not go Justin Fields on them, right? There was a very distinct difference between the Bears' rushing success and the Eagles' quarterback rushing outcomes. And I think you could kind of see what it would have looked like if if Hurts was doing what Fields was doing. That's a team struggling to stop quarterback running game. That's not what it really looked like watching Hurts in this game. And so, there's some progress there. And I think that's how you get to the Bears overachieving. The problem was they couldn't do enough to seal the upset and stay ahead when they had a lead and come back and retake the lead late in the game. We'll look at some of the things that went wrong and kind of get into where these one-on-one talent matchups really were the critical factors next on Locked On Bears. This show is sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. BetterHelp is here to help you with your mental health, especially this time of year can be surprisingly difficult for people. I mean, you think holidays is family and happy time for a lot of people, but it can also be very isolating. It can bring up bad memories, bad experiences in the past, especially people that might not have the same type of family environments that are as positive and might have more challenging circumstances. And of course, seasonal affective disorder, just not as much sunlight and cold. And BetterHelp is here for any and all of your mental health problems. It's not a crisis line. It's about making life a little bit easier on you each and every week. It's weekly virtual therapy with a therapist. They make it super easy to get matched with a therapist. And if there's one that you don't like, you're not clicking exactly, you can switch to a new one really easily. There's no waiting rooms, no traffic, no endless searching for the right therapist, all just 100% online. I do weekly online therapy myself. It's a really important part of my mental health regimen, and I highly recommend it for you as well with our friends at BetterHelp. Get unstuck with BetterHelp. Learn more and save 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. This episode is also brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. It's really easy to post your job on LinkedIn Jobs. And then they have simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. I'm on LinkedIn. I bet you, or certainly people you know, are also on LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. The Bears did a lot of positive things against the Philadelphia Eagles that you can take away from and feel like, yeah, there was progress, there were signs of better in the future from this Bears team. But obviously they lost and didn't play well enough. And I think there were a few particular things that stood out as maybe the biggest factors in this defeat. And I think number one has to be kind of what we expected, but it was really brutal at times. It's that Eagles pass rush and this Chicago Bears pass protection. Sometimes it was the protection call, where early in that game, you remember Cole Kmet is one-on-one with, I don't remember if it was Josh Sweat or Hassan Reddick. I'm pretty sure it was Josh Sweat, but they had 3 different guys get 2 sacks in this game. I mean, they were all doing damage, interchangeable names at this point. Yeah, you probably the protection needed to be different there, so it wasn't a tight end one-on-one with perhaps their best pass rusher of that group. Some of it was just guys getting straight up beat. We saw Alex Leatherwood particularly struggle and look a lot like the Alex Leatherwood that we thought he looked like in with the Raiders. And I tried to warn you last week because we talked on the podcast about how people were trying to break down Alex Leatherwood's 10 snaps against the Packers and claim he was playing super well. But I was seeing a lot of the same kind of mechanical issues that didn't affect him in the Packers game because the ball was getting out sooner and like he wasn't asked to block a lot of these guys one-on-one in the same way in that Packers game. So people were raving about how dominant Alex Leatherwood supposedly looked in those 10 snaps, and I still saw the same kind of waist bending that ended up being a problem in this game for a couple of sacks and a couple of quick pressures on the quarterback. And it looked to me like he's a guy that's not worth giving up on by any means, but just a guy who's still very much a project and not a guy that you go into next season thinking he's going to be your starter. He can compete and probably be a backup or a rotational guy, but not a guy that you're like all in on him in 2023. I think he's going to need the slow and steady patience approach. And I mean, yeah, he needs to be on the field to kind of work through some of these things, and it helps the development process. But man, not against the Buffalo Bills next week, right? Like, can we just roll with Riley Reiff for that game, and then Detroit and Minnesota after that? We can talk again. You know, we can reevaluate that going against less dominating pass rushers. But man, against the Eagles, it was rough. But I don't mean to just single out Alex Leatherwood. I mean, Cody Whitehair got his butt kicked a few times. Braxton Jones had 2 or 3 penalties in this game. And Sam Mustipher did some similar Sam Mustipher things. And of course, losing Tevin Jenkins does not make the offensive line's job easier. And that's one of the other things that stood out to me about this Bears loss. I mean, not only just things that are important, but also I think things that really actually contributed to that loss. Equanimeous St. Brown leaving, really having you bare at wide receiver, B-A-R-E. I keep running into that. Because when EQ goes down, all you got is Pettis, Pringle, Jones, and Webster. I mean, you have 4 wide receivers, and one of them, Simba Webster, just came up off the practice squad and had 0 career regular season catches entering this game. And the other one, Velus Jones, fumbled in this game, turned the ball over, which after the game, Matt Eberflus sounded very frustrated and unhappy with. Although Eberflus was smart to note the difference in terms of Velus Jones fumbling as a ball carrier and Velus Jones muffing 2 punts. That the mechanics are different. I mean, yes, they result in turnovers, and you know the consequences are similar, but it's not necessarily the same mistake 3 times because muffs is more about for him it was more about getting your feet under the punt and being in the right position and having your hands in the right spot versus fumbling on a play like this is having enough points of contact on the ball while you're carrying it. I think he might have fumbled on a kickoff return earlier this season, but it's not like he's up to 4 fumbles, right? It was bad, and I think he's going to be in the doghouse a bit, but they couldn't bench him in this game because they didn't have other wide receivers to bench him for. Like he played a lot of snaps because once EQ went out, they only had 4 guys. Like, they had to rotate those guys through, and you can't just go with those 3 guys, the other 3 guys on the field every play and keep Velus Jones on the bench, especially when you do want to get him opportunities as well. So I would expect if Claypool is healthy next week, and if N'Keal Harry is healthy next week, and if Equanimeous St. Brown is healthy next week, maybe we see the Velus Jones inactive healthy scratch again, just as punishment for that, because the Bears were frustrated. But I really felt like the injuries, the Velus Jones fumble, the offensive line struggles were really a lot of what held this Bears team back in this game. Because, like, defensively, holding Jalen Hurts to 25 points feels like, not an elite performance, but, like, that's about all I could expect, all you could hope for. You were kind of banking on the Bears needing to score more than 25 to win this game. And I felt like the offensive line, the injuries and the fumbles, although, losing Jack Sanborn to injury, pretty big for this Bears defense too. Joe Thomas played pretty well in his place, but I mean, we saw how well Sanborn had been playing, and Nick Morrow stepped up as well. I mean, the guys were able to step up a little bit, but certainly doesn't help that side of the ball was hit with injury as well. And those kind of things really contributed in a game like this where the margin of error was so little. Losing some players where you're already down talent did not help the problems here that this Bears group was dealing with. And ultimately, a lot of it still came down to, just talent versus talent. It's one of the things we talked about when we previewed the podcast, that Nick Sirianni and the Eagles defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, both coached with Eberflus in Indianapolis. Like, there weren't going to be too many big surprises on what each team was trying to do in terms of, scheme and play calling. So a lot of it was just going to come down to, like, okay, our guy versus your guy, one-on-one, who's going to be the more talented player and win those matchups. And pretty easy to look at the 2 roster sheets of the depth charts and notice a lot more talent in green there, but some guys in the Bears really stepped up and made those talent deficiencies or gaps a lot smaller than we thought they would be entering this game. And that I think made a lot of difference in how close this outcome ended up being. We'll look at where those one-on-ones played out, and a guy like Jalen Johnson in particular, winning some and losing some back and forth in this game, next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is presented by our friends at PrizePicks, the better way to play daily fantasy sports, because PrizePicks isn't like the other daily fantasy platforms. They put you in complete control. On some of those other ones, right, you're picking a lineup and you're competing against everybody else's lineup, and so whether you win or lose will depend on the players that other people pick. But with PrizePicks, it's just you versus the house, so you're in complete control, no competing against other players. You pick 2 to 5 players for your lineup, and then you'll decide whether they score more or less than their individual PrizePicks projections, and you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry, any game, any sport. They've got it all at PrizePicks, and it's super easy to enter, literally just 60 seconds or less. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with our promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Just don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON at sign-up for an instant deposit match up to $100. We knew it was going to come down to my guy against your guy a lot of times in this game, that there's only so much you can scheme. And at the end of the day, it's your number 1 wide receiver against our number 1 cornerback, the Jalen Johnson versus A.J. Brown battle. And I'm worried that, not nervous, but just I'm dreading that people are going to look at the box score and see A.J. Brown, 9 catches for 181 yards. I mean, obviously, huge game from him. I mean, he really helped carry a lot of this Eagles offense. But that full stat line is not a full reflection of the battle of him versus Jalen Johnson that I thought was really one of the pivotal themes throughout this game. That, having not gone through the All-22 film or anything yet, as I remember watching it live and from the notes that I took, I remember 2 times Jalen Johnson versus A.J. Brown going deep vertical. I think it was one on the left sideline and one down the right sideline that A.J. Brown caught, where Jalen Johnson is right there in perfect technique, perfect coverage. I mean, I guess perfect coverage would truly be an incomplete pass, but in both cases, it was a perfectly thrown ball where Jalen Johnson's hand is going across A.J. Brown's arms, like exactly what you coach the cornerback to do in that moment. Like you watch the replays of that, and it's like there's no notes. You wouldn't be like, oh, Jalen, you should have done this, or this better. I mean, it's just dropped in exactly where it needed to be to a receiver in stride. It's like sometimes a perfect pass beats perfect coverage. It's not to say that Jalen Johnson was perfect on the day. I mean, he made mistakes, and he certainly there was room for improvement. Earlier in those routes, he could maybe be another half step closer in the guy's hip, but like those weren't. Jalen Johnson was never just smoked by AJ Brown, right? He was never egregiously beat in a way that's like, oh yeah, like AJ Brown just mossed Jalen Johnson. And there were a handful of plays in there where Jalen Johnson was all over him. I mean, he made some really nice plays in coverage. There was a fourth down where the Eagles went for it. I don't remember if it was third quarter or early fourth quarter. Slant route over the middle, and Jalen Johnson's all over it, and he slams it down, he bats it away, and it's incomplete pass, fourth down. Individually, Jalen Johnson made the stop for the Bears with great coverage on one of the best young wide receivers in the NFL. That as much as people want to look at those two deep balls and say, oh, well, Jalen Johnson's not quite there yet. I mean, yes, he's not Darrelle Revis. He's not Jalen Ramsey. I'm not trying to put him in that category. But in this game, I came away more impressed with Jalen Johnson, not less impressed with how well he was covering AJ Brown. The Bears had him shadow him across the formation, left or right side, although anytime AJ Brown went into the slot, then Jalen Johnson stayed on the outside and they let Kyler Gordon cover AJ Brown. And it was really a lot of those types of plays where someone else was directly in coverage of Brown, where I think the majority of the 9 catches came from. I don't know the yardage. I mean, one of the vertical plays was a 68-yard pass, so Jalen Johnson is going to get dinged for a lot of not a lot, but a decent amount of the yardage because of the style of plays that he completed. It was a 68-yarder, and the other one was 29 yards. So the quick math on that is almost 100 yards, a little like 3 yards short, like 97 yards. 97 yards is not a good stat line for Jalen Johnson, but 2 catches allowed. They're 2 big catches, but the coverage was good, and he only allowed 2 catches. I mean, we haven't seen, again, the All-22 or the PFF numbers. There might have been another one that's on Jalen Johnson, but it seemed to me like a lot of the plays would be like Johnson follows him to one side of the field. Maybe A.J. Brown runs a slant, and you'll see Johnson cover him on the break and then pass him off because it's zone coverage, right? He wasn't in man-to-man coverage everywhere that A.J. Brown was on the field, but he would follow him pre-snap and be there right at the line of scrimmage to cover him at the beginning. And he'd pass it off to someone else, and then that person wouldn't be there, or that's who A.J. Brown would beat and get yards after the catch after those plays. It just didn't feel to me like Jalen Johnson was getting consistently beaten. There were 2 big ones where he was in pretty good coverage, and that was about it. And I was impressed that Jalen Johnson could go toe-to-toe against A.J. Brown with not much pass rush and not much talent around him to help in the secondary, and still largely limited a lot of the other damage outside of a couple plays in that game. You also saw Justin Fields win a lot of his one-on-ones in terms of missed tackles as a scrambler. Now, we saw in the pocket, this was something we warned about on Friday's Game Plan podcast, that this Eagles pass rush, not only are they really good at beating offensive linemen, they're really good at finishing sacks at the quarterback. And there were a few of those where Fields tried to escape and just couldn't. On the big one that almost scored a touchdown, he did escape, and that was great to see, and you still encourage him to still attempt to, but the Eagles were a lot better at finishing, and those were some of the big differences. It's like, okay, the Bears' talented player versus the Eagles' talented player. Does Fields win and break the tackle, or does the Eagles player win and get the sack? And when Fields made the tackle miss, big things happen for the Bears' offense. And of course, when he doesn't, it's a sack, and it's a big things for the Eagles' defense that really shut down a lot of drives for the Chicago Bears. And credit to David Montgomery for making some guys miss too. But you also see Leatherwood loses some one-on-ones against Sweat, or Cody Whitehair on some of those stunts coming inside on him. Losing those one-on-one battles, and Braxton Jones too over there. That's what happens in a game like this. It's not so much some new thing that the Eagles figured out how to do. I mean, they ran a lot of stunts and they were very aggressive with them, but every team does that. It was just your talented players against the Bears' talented players, and the Eagles players had a bit more of that talent at too many different spots to overcome for the Bears. Even when the Eagles give you some turnovers, but you also have some injuries in there and some real offensive line struggles that really, and a missed PAT too with Cairo Santos, where I don't have a good explanation on that at this point. That he's still a really accurate kicker, and that feels more important. Hitting the threes are more important than hitting the ones. It'd be like an NBA player who has great range but can't hit free throws. It's kind of like Shaq. I mean, it's not a 1-to-1 because PATs should be even easier than that, and you really need your kicker to fully hit the easy ones in a situation like that. It should be automatic, and he's not. But I'm not ready to like cut Cairo Santos tomorrow because he missed his 5th extra point. Like, the Bears did not lose this game because of a missed extra point, and I don't know that they've lost a game yet this season because of a missed extra point. So it's a concern, but it's not a 5-alarm fire just yet. I mean, once he starts missing field goals, or really starts affecting him in other ways, maybe we can really start to pull I mean, certainly you think about getting some competition in the offseason, sure. But I mean, like right now, the remainder of the season, you're not going to start bringing in a bunch of kickers and doing a carousel that way. I just think maybe more than a camp leg this offseason, just to have another option for you in the docket here as you go through the rest of next year's OTAs and training camps and everything else like that. Still a long way to go before we get to that point of this of this year, this calendar year for your Chicago Bears. We still have more to break down from this Eagles game. We have to turn around and get ready for a Buffalo Bills game because, even though this game didn't mean anything for the Bears, really, it was still fun to watch. And that's something that I really have appreciated about this end of this season, and having Justin Fields on the Bears roster. Like, he makes these meaningless December games fun to watch. Like, if he was hurt and we had to watch Nathan Peterman for more than one throw, it's hard to bring yourself to tune in and want to watch, especially against a team like the Eagles. But Fields gives us a reason to watch every single Sunday, or I guess Saturday coming up here. And so we're going to keep breaking it down for you each and every week. Make sure you hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening to the Locked On Bears podcast, or on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making the Locked On Bears podcast your first listen today. If you're looking for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports today for all the biggest stories from across sports each and every morning, half hour or less in your podcast feed. Big game reactions, the biggest stories across the league, and so much more every day on Locked On Sports today. Then come on back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity to bear down.